Hi, and welcome back to the History Hut. I'm Jim, this is Dr. K, and we're still talking Confederation. And we finished off talking about the Red River Rebellion, so let's continue on with that.
Okay, so what's going on at Red River? All this unease, obviously, with the expansionists in their midst, but also massive economic problems. So fur trade in steep decline, the buffalo has all but disappeared, so that's really problematic. And the Dominion government, in preparation for bringing this area into Confederation, sends surveyors out. So send out surveyors to survey the land of people who are already settled on the land, and the surveyors go out and they survey it in the English square lot. And of course, most of the French Metis in Red River have their land in the long seigneurial strip. So you're doing this bizarre surveying where you're joining in other people's bits of land. So they're really kind of panicking about that. And then you get crop failure as well in the region. And so who is it that comes to the rescue? Writing in Louie Rielle, born near Winnipeg in the 1840s, and as I said in the last one, he's Métis. He's sent to the Collège Classique down east, and he decides eventually not to become a priest student. It's like one of these 8-year stints, none of your 4 years at college. It's a much longer time than that. So he actually leaves college and he takes a job in a law company, a law firm. And the owner of the law firm is against Confederation, so that may have had some impact as well. But anyway, he comes back. He has an unhappy love affair as well when the French-Canadian girl that he really likes, it turns out that her parents find out that, oh my God, he's a half-breed, or even worse, an Indian, and that's called off. So he's quite unhappy. So his father dies as well. So he returns to Red River in 1868. He's perhaps the best educated man in the area, happy to deal with both the French and English communities. And so he's becomes a fairly controversial figure. He's heroic in this period. He comes back, does all the right things, writes up a great petition to the government, just asking for all sorts of things like the rights to the land that they already have, responsible government, coming into Confederation as an actual province. So he does a lot of good stuff. But of course, the first thing he does is he stops the government from coming in and actually declaring this place part of Canada. So that guy, William McDougall, comes down. Of course, to get to Manitoba or to get to the west, you had to go down through the States and then up. So the guy comes to the border, and Rielle and his pals are waiting for him, and the guy goes, "This belongs to Canada," and then goes back. And then Rielle goes, "Well, actually, you've established this belongs to Canada, and there's no Canadian government here, so I'm going to establish a provisional government, and we'll run the place until we can negotiate our way into Confederation." So he's actually kind of cool. Of course, MacDonald's not happy about this turn of events at all, but in fact, it's okay for him to establish a provisional government because there is no real government in the area. And so he takes over Fort Garry. He prepares, as I said, this Bill of Rights that asks for really normal things. This is no Russian Revolution, like line them all up against the wall and kill them. This is you see it looking back, it looks very, very sensible. The question was, would the Dominion negotiate? And the answer is they didn't really have any option because they don't have a railway going into the area. They can't get troops there through the winter. That they can't really do anything at all, and they don't want to tip the Americans off that they're having problems in the West in case the Americans go, "We'll just help it, we'll just come up and we'll just," so it's all kind of meh. So anyway, the government, Cartier is sent out, and the government does negotiate. They have a public meeting in -20 degrees that lasts for 5 hours, and it's attended by Donald Smith, Cartier, and all these
also known as an outdoor hockey game.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, probably one of the first ones.
The Winter Classic.
Yes, the Winter Classic. Exactly, it's exactly the right time and everything. And so the government side persuade them that yes, they do want to see a peaceful resolution to this, and that's fine. And they elect a little national convention of 40 people. And then the next step was that they would send them in March to Ottawa, and then they would negotiate their way into Confederation. So it looked really good. you have to wonder if the government would have negotiated had they been able to actually get into the area, but they couldn't, so there's nothing else they could do. So the negotiations take place in Ottawa. Everything goes really well. Cartier and French Canadians want this to be a little Quebec out west. So extend it as a little Quebec. Anglophones, of course, want it to be a little Ontario. So Cartier kind of wins out for the moment anyway. And then as a result of the negotiations, the Metis in compensation were to be given 1.4 million hectares of land. So that meant everybody would get about 160 acres, or a land scrip, SCRIP, a land scrip that would be for 160 acres. And so it's about $1 an acre. So you could either sell your land scrip or you could keep it. And so whether or not, the government was happy to negotiate doesn't really come into it, but something really unfortunate happens while the negotiations are going on, because there's a bit of a little kind of uprising from amongst these Ontario expansionists who are in there going, oh, well, the government can't help out, so we'll try and take Fort Garry back. And of course, they try and take Fort Garry back, and they fail. And you have this guy, Schultz, in jail, kind of sassing his people looking after him, and also a guy called Thomas Scott, who becomes a hero in Ontario. He's an Orangeman, anti-Catholic, pro-expansionist, and so he's particularly troublesome, and did a kind of Roberto Alomar, spat on everybody and cursed them out and stuff. And eventually, Rielle seems to have kind of lost control of the men that were guarding him, and he's kind of forced into a position where Scott is given the opportunity to just, shut up and put up, or else, leave, and he doesn't want to do either one. And so they're like, okay, sorry, treason against the provisional government, too bad, have a trial. He's found guilty, and they take him out and shoot him. Oh. And so this is considered by many to be Rielle's biggest mistake, and the one that will eventually lead to his hanging, because nobody in Ontario forgets this ever, even though he's given an amnesty. And even Macdonald's quite happy to get rid of him when he actually starts another rebellion in 1885. So Ontarians absolutely incensed by this, and they put a price. So right in the middle of the negotiations, the Ontario government, I think, put a price of $5,000 dead or alive on Rielle's head. So there's a lot of kind of aggro between the two groups now, and Scott becomes a bit of a martyr, and Rielle is denounced as a half-breed papist murderer. I don't think there's any other kind of rude things you could have said about him. So Ontarians want him brought to justice, and it's on the strength of this public opinion that in the summer Macdonald allows for a volunteer force to be raised under Wolseley. The Wolseley expedition is sent to the area, and it takes them 3 months to get there. And of course, this is, in a way, this is good for Macdonald, because it shows that if they had a railway, which is part of his dream for the country, they'd have been able to get troops in there right away, and they wouldn't be able to put the rebellion down, but it hadn't happened. So by the time Wolseley gets there, of course, Rielle's well gone, and they don't meet with much resistance, but the Métis had seen Canada ready to use force against them. And Ontario's happy about this. Quebec, it has a very bad impact on Quebec, because Quebec, sees Rielle, because he's educated there, they see Rielle as a son of French Canada, and of course the extension of French rights into the West. And there's no amnesty for Rielle at all. So you do get, out of this, you do get the Manitoba Act, and it goes into law in July of 1870. It's quite good. So here you have the land settlement and all the usual things. So Manitoba comes in as a province, but it's not the province that we know and love today. It's called the postage stamp province. So if you looked at the map of Manitoba, it's this little corner in the bottom, so a tiny little corner in the bottom, and that tiny little corner was Manitoba, and the rest of the territory is still the Northwest Territory, and it doesn't have any of the things that you get in this case. So Manitoba comes in as this tiny little province, and Rielle's gone. But Manitoba now has, all the things that the other provinces have, and they have the right to send 4 MPs and 2 senators to Ottawa. And of course, the first thing that they do, and it's just lovely, really, the first thing they do is they elect, the people of Provencher elect the now in exile Louie Rielle as their MP. And he actually shows up at the house and signs in, even though there's like all this money on his head, dead or alive. It's actually, you know, cocky little thing. Goes and signs in, and then leaves before anybody can kind of nail him. So there's all sorts of wonderful political cartoons about that. So so you get the land settlement for the Métis. That's good. The public debt, of course, wiped out. Exemption from taxes for the first 5 years. The kind of traditional things. And French and English both recognised as official languages. And there's a little question over public schooling, which becomes our huge issue later on. But what the Métis don't get is they don't get all of the Northwest. They don't get control over natural resources because the government, in this case, wants to, get its train lines all organised and set out. They don't want to have to negotiate as they go ahead. And you don't get amnesty for Rielle. He does, in fact, get an amnesty 5 years later, and then it kicks in another 5 years after that. So he's out of the picture for the moment. Most of the people, it should have worked out really well for the Métis, but it doesn't really, because the first lieutenant governor, when he comes in, he says, "Oh well, quite nice land you've got there. Okay, the Métis land, the land that you're going to get, you can have that land over there. We'll use this land." So they don't even get to kind of stay on their own land, and there's a lot of disruption, and of course this kind of really poor economic climate, and a lot of people sell up their land scripts. The other thing is, to actually get the land script, they had to apply to the Hudson Bay Company for that. That took like maybe a year, and then they had to send that to Ottawa, and that might be, so it's kind of like a 2-year delay. And in the meantime, you've got people coming in from Ontario and kind of just doing the whole squatter thing in yours. So lots and lots of problems. The rest of the Northwest enter under the same time under this Temporary Act for Governing of the Northwest, and then in 1875 you get the Northwest Territories Act, and it gets a lieutenant governor and the promise of responsible government in the future. So it doesn't come in as a province, and that means, of course, that whole area that would really be the rest of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, you don't have any MPs and you don't have any senators. So when things do start to go wrong later on in the 1880s in the West, you've really got very, very few people. You haven't got, you can't say, well, I've got my vote and want my MP to do this for me. So it becomes problematic for them. And then with Rupert's Land taken care of, the Dominion government negotiates 8 treaties with treaties 1 to 8 from Cree, Assiniboine, Ojibwe as well, I think, Saulteaux and the Blackfoot. So they start negotiating treaties, and we're going to talk about that in an entirely separate section, because very, very interesting. So yeah, that's kind of the scoop on what happens in the West. So the West is actually quite problematic as it comes in. And then, of course, there's that area beyond the West. The area beyond the West. Yeah, that's what we call it. The
West of West.
The West beyond
the
the
West.
West
Story.
Yeah, that's
West
Gene
Side
Barman.
Story.
So Gene Barman's book's called The West Beyond the West. So BC. So,
yeah,
so here you've got the government going, okay, so now we've got everything from Nova Scotia all the way to the crest of the Rockies. What's left? We're like, I think there's something
we'll find out in part 3 of our discussion of Confederation on History Hut Canada. We'll see you there.